My mother-in-law forced a DNA test to expose me, and the results destroyed her own marriage. Not mine, hers. The marriage she had spent 31 years curating like a museum exhibit, polished, presented, perfectly arranged for public admiration, came apart in a single afternoon in my kitchen because she had been so certain of my guilt that she never once considered what the science might say about her own. She handed me that test with the confidence of a woman who has already written the ending. She had the results in an envelope. She had witnesses, her sister, her closest friend, my husband standing in the corner of the room with the specific stillness of a man who does not know which way to move. She had a speech prepared. I could tell by the way she was holding herself, that particular uprightness of someone who has been rehearsing. She said I was a cheater. She said the baby I was carrying was not her son's. She said she had always known that I was not good enough for her family and that this was the proof she had been waiting for. And then I opened the envelope. If you are listening to this right now, stay with me, because what happened next is the kind of thing that sounds like fiction and isn't. The kind of thing that makes you understand at a cellular level why people who live in glass houses are advised against the throwing of stones. And before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you are listening from right now. Are you someone who has a mother-in-law who has made you feel from the very first day that you are an intruder in her family? Are you someone who has been accused in something you didn't do and had to sit with the injustice of it while everyone around you decided what they believed? I read every comment, every single one, because this story belongs to every person who has ever been put on trial by someone who should have been an ally and watched the verdict turn around completely. Let me take you back, not to the kitchen, not to the envelope, all the way back to the beginning, to the woman I was when I married into this family, and to the woman who decided from day one that I was a problem to be solved. My name is Imogene Calloway Bright. I am 34 years old. I was raised in a small coastal town in North Carolina by a mother who was a pediatric nurse and a father who ran a bait and tackle shop and read philosophy books in the back of it when customers were scarce, which was more often than the business plan suggested was ideal, but the philosophy books were genuinely excellent, so as a family we considered it a net positive. I grew up with sand between my toes and dinner table conversations that ranged from the migratory patterns of striped bath to the categorical imperative, sometimes in the same evening. It was an unusual childhood. I loved it. I am not by nature a dramatic person. I say this not to preempt anything about the story I am about to tell, but because I think it is important context. I am a family therapist. Yes, you heard that correctly. And yes, I am aware of the particular irony embedded in that fact given everything you are about to hear. I have spent 12 years helping other people untangle the specific, complicated knots of family systems, communication patterns, the ways that love and power get confused with each other in the close quarters of blood relation. I know a dysfunctional family system when I see one. What I did not fully appreciate until I was inside one is how different it feels to see it from the inside versus the therapeutic distance of a professional chair. I met my husband, Callum Bright, at a conference 7 years ago. He is an architect. He designs buildings the way I navigate family systems, with an eye for the invisible structures, the load-bearing elements that are not always visible in the finished product, but that determine whether the whole thing stands or collapses. We recognized something in each other immediately, the kind of recognition that is not about surface compatibility, we are very different people in many ways, but about something more foundational. We made sense together in the way of things that are structurally sound. We dated for 2 years, we got engaged, we were married in a small ceremony on the North Carolina coast, barefoot in the sand with 40 people who loved us, because that is who we are, and that is the wedding we wanted. Her mother's name was Nadine Bright. And Nadine Bright did not approve of me, not from the first meeting, not from the engagement, not from the wedding, not from a single moment in the 4 years of our marriage before the events of this story. She did not disapprove of me for a reason she ever articulated clearly. That, in my professional experience, is often the tell. Clear disapproval usually has a stated basis. The unstated kind is generally about something other than what it appears to be. It is generally about the person doing the disapproving, not the person being disapproved of. Nadine was, to describe her fairly, a woman who had organized her identity entirely around her family, specifically around her role as the central figure in it. She had been the primary architect of the Bright family's social presentation for 30 years, the holidays, the image, the narrative of who they were as a unit. She planned the gatherings and curated the photographs and managed the story. Her husband, Gerald, was a quiet man who moved through the world in the specific way of people who have learned that accommodation is easier than conflict and made a kind of peace with that, though not always a comfortable one. Her son Callum was, until me, entirely within her orbit. Dutiful, present, the kind of son who called and visited and deferred in the easy, unexamined way of someone who had no reason to examine it. And then I arrived. I was not hostile to Nadine. I want to be clear about that, because I have examined my own behavior in those early years with the same rigor I would apply to a client's, looking for the places where I contributed, where I could have done differently, where the conflict had roots I helped water. I was not hostile. But I also, and this is the thing I think that was unforgivable to her, I was not deferential. I am a woman who was raised to have opinions and express them respectfully, who was trained professionally to be direct and boundaried, who loves her husband genuinely and sees him as a partner rather than an extension of her mother's project. And that combination, non-deference plus genuine partnership, disrupted the gravity of Nadine's system in a way she experienced as a direct threat. She made it known, not loudly. Nadine is not a loud woman in public. She is a whisper and implication woman, which, in my professional opinion, is considerably more difficult to navigate than loud. She made comments about my cooking that were framed as helpful suggestions. She made observations about our home that were framed as aesthetic preferences. She offered parenting opinions before we had children, which is its own specific category of presumption, that were framed as wisdom. And underneath all of it, in every interaction, was the steady, patient pressure of a woman who had decided that I was temporary and was simply waiting for me to become aware of that fact. When I became pregnant, genuinely, excitedly, lovingly pregnant, with a baby that Callum and I had been hoping for, Nadine received the news with a smile that did not reach the place smiles are supposed to reach. She said all the right words, she said them in the wrong key. And 3 months into my pregnancy, Nadine told Callum she had concerns. Callum told me about his mother's concerns on a Wednesday evening. He told me in the specific way of a man who is delivering something he doesn't want to deliver, carefully, with cushioning, with the emphasis placed on the fact that he himself didn't believe it, that he was telling me only because he felt I deserved to know what was being said. What was being said was this: Nadine had told Callum that she had reason to believe, she did not specify the nature of the reason, which is telling, that I had been unfaithful, that the baby might not be his, that she had noticed things, observed things, had a feeling she could not ignore as a mother. She had presented this to her son not as an accusation, but as a concern, because that is how Nadine narrated everything wrapped in the language of care and love and maternal instinct, so that to push back on it felt like pushing back on motherhood itself. Callum told me he had defended me. He told me he had told his mother she was wrong. He told me he believed me completely. And then he asked, gently, carefully, with love and apology built into every syllable, he asked if I would be willing to do a prenatal paternity test, not because he doubted me, but because he thought it would put the matter to rest, because his mother was causing stress, and stress was bad for the pregnancy, and if a test made the stress stop, then the test was worth doing. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think it is important to be honest about it. I was a family therapist. I understood the system Nadine was operating within. I understood Callum's position, the man caught between the woman he married and the woman who raised him, trying to find a solution that preserved everything, not fully grasping that some situations do not have solutions that preserve everything, and that the attempt to find one sometimes costs more than acknowledging that fact. I said yes, not because I was afraid of the results. I was not afraid of the results because I knew exactly what the results would say. I said yes because I am a woman who has never run from truth, and because I genuinely thought, that the results would close something, that there would be an envelope, and inside would be a number, and that number would end the conversation, and Nadine would be required to sit with what her suspicion had produced and find a way to do better. I did not anticipate what was actually in the envelope, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the afternoon Nadine chose for the delivery of the results, because the staging of it tells you everything you need to know about what she expected to find. Nadine requested that the results be shared together, as a family. She used those words, as a family, which is the kind of phrase that sounds unifying and is being used as a mechanism of control. She wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses to whatever was about to happen. She wanted the moment to have the proper staging. She arrived at our house on a Saturday afternoon with her sister Patricia, a woman who has been Nadine's audience and validator for so long that I am not sure she has an independent opinion left, and her closest friend Wanda, who had the good grace of looking slightly uncomfortable about the arrangement, but came anyway, because that is what 40 years of friendship will do. Callum was there. Gerald, his father, was there, quieter than usual, seated in the corner armchair with the slightly distant expression he often wore in family gatherings, the expression of a man whose inner weather I had always found difficult to read. Nadine had the envelope. She had collected the results herself from the testing company. She had been the one to arrange the test, to pay for it, to coordinate the sample collection. She had been holding those results for 2 days before this gathering. I know this because the testing company's portal showed the results available 2 days prior. I had checked. I had seen the results. I knew exactly what the envelope contained. I want to stop here and explain something because it is important. When I checked the portal and saw the results, I saw 2 things. The first thing I saw was what I expected to see, the confirmation of what I already knew to be true. The second thing I saw was something I did not expect, something that took me several minutes of rereading to be certain I was interpreting correctly, something that once I was certain, I sat with quietly for 2 days while Nadine held her envelope and waited for her Saturday. I did not tell Callum what I had seen. I told myself it was because I needed to be sure. I told myself it was because the information needed to be handled carefully and in the right setting. Both of those things were true. But I also know, if I'm being entirely honest, that some part of me, the part that is not a therapist, but simply a woman who has been accused of something she didn't do by someone who has made her life difficult for 4 years, that part wanted the envelope opened in the room, with the audience Nadine had assembled, with Gerald in the corner chair. I am not entirely proud of that. I am also not going to pretend it wasn't there. Nadine stood in my living room with her envelope and her witnesses and her 31 years of marriage behind her like a wall she believed was solid. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who has never once in her life doubted the correctness of her own judgment, and she said the things she had come to say. She said, I was a cheater. She said the baby was not Callum's. She said she had known from the beginning that I was not right for her son. She said she had tried to be patient, tried to give me the benefit of the doubt, tried to love me as a daughter because Callum loved me, and that patience, she said, had not been rewarded with the honesty it deserved. Her voice was shaking slightly, not from uncertainty, from the specific tremor of someone who has been holding something tightly for a long time and finally fully releasing their grip. Callum said, Mom. She said, "Let me finish." She finished, and then she held out the envelope. I took it. I looked at it for a moment. I looked at Gerald in the corner. He was looking at the floor. I opened the envelope. Gerald spoke first. He said, "Nadine, it's time." She said nothing. She was looking at her hands. He said, "Callum deserves to know." What Callum deserved to know, what unspooled in that living room over the next hour, in the halting, raw, stop-and-start way that 30-year-old secrets come out when they finally come out, was this. Nadine had been pregnant before she met Gerald, a relationship that had ended, she said badly, Gerald said with slightly more specificity than she was comfortable with, and left her pregnant and alone and 23 years old in a world that had considerably less grace for such situations than it does now. She had met Gerald 3 months into the pregnancy. Gerald had known from the beginning. He had loved her. He had chosen to marry her and claim the child and never speak of it again. They had agreed. The secret would go with them. It would never touch Callum. It had touched Callum now. Callum was... I want to describe this carefully because he is my husband and I love him, and his experience of that afternoon belongs primarily to him, not to this story. He was quiet for a long time. He asked questions in the measured way of someone who is being very deliberate about staying inside their own body while receiving information that wants to throw you out of it. He asked who his biological father was. Gerald said he didn't know. Nadine had lost contact entirely, and Gerald, in his love and his decision to claim the child, had deliberately not asked for details that would complicate what he was choosing. He had chosen Callum as his son, fully, without qualification, for 31 years. Callum looked at Gerald for a long time after that, and then he said, "You've been my father for 31 years. Gerald said, "I have." Callum said, "That doesn't change." Gerald nodded once, and I watched something in his face, the specific something of a man who had been quietly terrified of a moment for 3 decades. I watched it release. Nadine was the complicated center of this. She had done something, the original concealment, that was understandable in its context, driven by fear and circumstance and the specific vulnerabilities of a young woman in a difficult position. And she had done something else. The years of silence, the choice to let Callum go his whole life without the full truth of himself, that was a different category of choice, one made not from fear, but from the desire to protect an image, a version of events, a story in which she had done nothing that required accounting for. And in pursuing me, in being so certain of my guilt, so eager to expose my failure, she had detonated the very thing she had spent 31 years protecting. My mother was a nurse. My father read philosophy in the back of a bait shop, and somewhere between the two of them, they gave me a deep and abiding appreciation for the way things loop back, the way the energy you put into the world has a trajectory, and that trajectory eventually completes itself. I am not a believer in cosmic punishment, but I am a believer in the law of unintended consequences, and I am a believer in the particular tendency of people who are hiding something to be the loudest in the room about the secrets of others. It is the hiding that makes them so certain guilt exists. It is the hiding that makes them look so hard for it everywhere else. My daughter was born 4 months after that Saturday. We named her Josephine, Josie mostly, and she has Gerald's ears and Callum's laugh and something around her eyes that is entirely her own. She is the most concrete and beautiful argument against every accusation that was made in that kitchen, though I try not to think of her in those terms because she deserves to be simply herself and not a symbol of anything. Nadine and Gerald did not divorce, though they came close. There were months of very hard work, actual therapeutic work, with a couples counselor who I am told is excellent, though I naturally had no involvement in selecting or communicating with that person because appropriate professional boundaries exist for good reasons. What I know is what Callum tells me. They are in a different place now. Not repaired to what they were, that version is gone, and some things should not be rebuilt exactly as they stood, because what stood was not entirely honest. but something real is being built in its place, slower, more truthful, more tired perhaps, but more genuine. Callum knows he wants to know more about his biological father. This is a process he is in the early stages of, with support, with care, with the knowledge that Gerald Bright is his father in every way that has mattered for 31 years, and seeking information is not a rejection of that. I support him in this completely and without complication, because I am his wife and because I understand that identity is not a threat to love. It is simply its own thing, and it deserves its own space. Nadine and I, this is the question I am asked most often, and I will answer it honestly. We are not close. We may never be close in the way that some daughters and mother-in-laws are, and I have made my peace with that. But something shifted between us after that Saturday. The campaign ended. The whispers and implications and patient hostility that had characterized every interaction for 4 years, that stopped. Not because she became a different person, but because something she had been using without knowing she was using it, the moral high ground, the certainty of her own righteousness, the absolute conviction that I was the one with something to hide, that ground had shifted under her feet, and she knew it, and I think she knew that I knew it. She came to see Josie 3 weeks after she was born. She sat in the chair by the window and held her granddaughter, and she looked at me over Josie's head with an expression that was not an apology. She has not apologized in words, and I am not sure she will, but that contained something in the neighborhood of acknowledgement, the specific expression of someone who is aware of a debt they may never find the right currency to repay. I nodded, she nodded, Josie slept. We let it be what it was. I am a family therapist. I have sat across from people in the middle of their worst moments, the revelations, the ruptures, the points of no return, and I have helped them find a way to be honest about what happened without letting what happened be the only thing their family ever is. I believe in that work. I believe in the possibility of repair, even when repair looks nothing like restoration. What I do not believe in, what this experience confirmed for me in the most personal and undeniable way possible, is the safety of the glass house. There is no version of certainty about another person's guilt that exempts you from your own accounting. There is no finger pointed outward that does not eventually have 3 pointing back. My mother-in-law was so sure of what she would find in that envelope. She was right about one thing and catastrophically wrong about another, and the collision of those 2 things in the same document, in the same afternoon, in the same room, that is the story. Not a story of revenge, a story of truth. Truth does not take sides. It does not care about who arranged the test or who is holding the envelope. It simply is. And when you invite it into the room, when you make it official, documented, sealed in a laboratory, and delivered in a certified report, you have to be prepared for everything it might say. She was not prepared. I was.